it's a very confusing world at the moment. Trying to work out what's going on is very hard, I think, for anybody to try and ascertain what people who speak on the internet or people who speak on the mainstream media are actually saying, because there seems to be a lot of substance between the lines, and it can be quite scary and it can be worrying. And I know from the mailbag that I get, having started to just talk about the things, it's been very worrying for some people, and they're confused and baffled just as much as I am. And in fact, I don't really want to be making these types of videos. I would very much like the old world back, please, in which I was making videos exploring England's heritage, landscape and nature. But every time I try to move away from this, I find there's another email or another web link to look at, or another little piece of a jigsaw to think, where does that fit in? And it gets very confusing. And I think, oh, okay, I suppose I better have a look at this. One of my viewers very kindly shared an email that they'd had from an MP. In my last video, I asked rather frustratedly, who trusts the MPs? And it was interesting, I can tell you, to look at the results that came back in the comments. It does seem that very few of you actually have much faith in the Parliament or the MPs or whoever it is that leads your organisation. And many people say that with power, of course, comes the ability to be corrupt and deceive, of course. Now, I'm just an ordinary everyday citizen. I'm not really an expert in very much. I can generally point a camera and get it in focus, and that's about it. But I'm finding it fascinating trying to work out what's going on, and people have asked me to continue to talk about it. So I am, but I can't say conclusively what's going on. But I wanted to read you this email that my viewer, who was asking the local MP about what was going on in this, and in a similar situation to me, really, about how safe are the vaccines, and how, you know, when people like Andrew Bridgen stand up and talk about these harms and things, and is there some sort of world government trying to take over our lives or sort our lives out in one way or another? You know, it can be incredibly confusing. You go online and there's so much to sort of try and work your way through. You're like a rat in a maze, and you're sort of going, well, I don't really understand. And you'd think that you could talk to your MP and ask them. So now, let me just say, this has been sent to me. I have no idea of its genuine nature. I mean, I have no reason at all to doubt it, but because it wasn't sent to me from my MP with the address and all of that, I can't verify it. And I'm not even going to pretend that it's 100% true. But even if it's a token of what an MP's response is to questions, it's interesting. You, of course, the viewer, will have to make up your own mind whether you think it's a fair representation of what an MP might say to you. I'll leave that bit up to you. Otherwise, you'll just have to take it as a piece of entertainment, I suppose, because I can't, as I say, I'm not saying that this is true or not. It's just come to me this way, but I find it interesting, and I thought you might too. So, and I appreciate the sort of situation that perhaps an MP might be in. So I'm trying to be measured, and I'm trying to give both sides of the story here, but we'll come to that in a minute. So it says something like this. Well, it says this: many thanks for your email. I have to say, though, absolutely not when it comes to vaccines. So there was obviously a question there. I can't remember what it was about. The evidence for the efficacy and the safety of the vaccines is now stronger than ever. So this MP is saying few vaccines, if any, have been delivered to as many people as safely as the COVID ones. The anti-vaccine misinformation, which continues to infect certain elements of the internet, is not only ignorant, anti-science and plain wrong, it is dangerous, this MP says, allegedly. You are incorrect on this nonsense around deaths and injuries from vaccines, and clearly those pushing this rubbish do not understand the system for recording those, and nor do they appear to appreciate the damage anti-vaxxers have done to those systems, nor have they appreciated how the recording of deaths actually works. It's funny how many people seem prepared to believe nonsense written and misrepresented by a few cranks over the internet, over the overwhelming majority of scientific and medical opinion across the entire planet. Properly evidenced and peer-reviewed studies and trials from the most reputable medical and scientific institutions and bodies on the planet are rubbished by a few nutters on the internet who misrepresent information deliberately and present it out of context to mislead the reader. It is sinister. If we listened to these types of whack jobs, we would never have eradicated diseases. Thanks to vaccines, which used to regularly kill thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of our citizens every year, human beings have never had such advanced medical treatments and medical care than we have today. And that is because we have, as with COVID, developed vaccines and trusted and relied upon the establishment of robust systems we have in place globally to develop treatments, drugs and vaccines. I suggest sometime getting information from reputable sources who are easily able to disprove the nonsense spouted out online. This MP, alleged MP, goes on to say, I'm not a scientist or a medical expert, and therefore I'll continue to follow the overwhelming majority of those that are. Then it goes on about lockdowns and mask wearing and stuff, which I won't bore you with. And then we get towards the end where the viewer was asking the opinion of the MP about the World Economic Forum, because there's a lot of information, whether it's one way or another. I'll just call it information. You can decide what you think about it, claiming certain things. And I know people will have read this and will be a bit confused about what they are. Well, the MP says, as to the World Economic Forum, oh, for heaven's sake, that's the stuff of online conspiracy theorists. Next, you'll be telling me that David Icke has figured it all out, or that chemtrails are a real thing. Now, I don't know whether David Icke's figured it out or whether chemtrails are whatever. I don't really know much about chemtrails, and please don't send me anything about that because my inbox is already full of stuff that I'm trying to decipher. Finally, he says, sadly, we've seen conspiracy theorists use the pandemic to further all sorts of conspiracy theories from, this is his words, not mine, it's the Jews that created COVID, to the WHO or the WEF are trying to create a world government. It's all utter balderdash. Global institutions exist in many forms to promote global cooperation and engagement, and it's nothing but good. It is not, this MP goes on to say, alleged MP, it is not some secret plan to create a new world order or whatever the cranks are calling it this week. Dear me. So that's an email, as I say, apparently from an MP. Now let's just take for a moment and say it's absolutely genuine, because if it's not genuine, you can just completely ignore it, can't you? But let's just assume that it's genuine for the sake of this next bit. And that is to say, if you were an MP, it's going to be very difficult, isn't it? Because whether you did think there was something wrong with either the vaccines, as they're so called, or whether that you were being told by a secret society, let's say, for the sake of argument, that you couldn't say anything about what's going on, you obviously couldn't have that response. You couldn't be honest with your constituent who has emailed you to say, I'm a bit worried about this, I read this online and I don't know what to do about it. Clearly, the MP is in a difficult position because they may know exactly what's going on or have a good idea, because they're just as likely to be able to look online and think, a few people have said this, I wonder what it's about. And they may have found it a bit difficult to believe or difficult to talk about. They may be that they are actually in a bubble in which to even mention it to their peers and colleagues makes them look like a whack job themselves, to use his own words, assuming it's real, of course. So I completely understand that MPs will not or could not answer honestly if they knew, assuming there was anything going on. I'm trying to be as diplomatic and as measured and trying to, balance out this. I'm not saying there is anything going on, because on a channel like YouTube, to make such claims might impact against me when I've got no evidence other than, looking around and making up my own mind. Common sense might lead me down one story. The mainstream media and the government might persuade me of a different story. Ultimately, I make up my own mind, just as you would make up your own mind, and work out, would people tell me if there was something nasty happening? Would they be broadcasting it from the BBC? Probably not, anyway, assuming there was. So we're all in this very sticky situation because the internet is full of all this stuff. But the problem is that the mainstream media, we have seen how they've been so biased and how the government and the MPs don't wish to engage. And this is where it makes me suspicious. This is where trying to stay measured, trying to stay open-minded, or trying to see the other side, or the MP side of the equation, is becoming more difficult. Because if I was the MP and somebody had written to me in a frightened tone and said, look, I'm really worried about all of this, and you think, right, okay, here's somebody who's been reading a lot of stuff, they're clearly concerned. The ONS, the Office of National Statistics, are putting up figures of things like excess deaths, and it is concerning. And Andrew Bridgen stood up as an MP in the House of Commons and made his point about the yellow card system, and it did seem to anybody watching that that was abnormally high. Again, like I said in my previous video, you would think that the medical profession, the government who've been endorsing this and trying to get us to do things, would want to just keep the trust going, to instead of just doubling down and saying, don't believe anything you read online, it's all by whack jobs, they're all nutters and stuff. I would have found that difficult as a constituent if my MP had written to me in that tone, assuming it's real. I would have found that quite offensive, really. I would have much preferred to have an MP coming back to me and saying, it's very interesting what you're saying. Yes, there is a lot of this information online. We really ought to bring this out into the open, if only to find out whether we can discount it, rather than just say it's all rubbish, all of it, every last bit, because we know, do we not? For example, I think it's every 30 years or something like that, government files can be opened up over certain periods of time, and we read that governments have done things which they lied about to the public. They have lied, we know that's a fact. 30 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, history tells us that the governments do lie. Sometimes, I imagine, that they have to because they don't want to create a panic. So I understand there's a reason for their lies. Sometimes it may be purely selfish. It may be that they're out for money themselves, or they may be corrupt. We know that happens. So it's not like it doesn't ever happen. So if there are suspicions online, if people are making accusations, if they're presenting what seems to be evidence, or they're questioning the evidence that the government themselves are putting out, then I can't really see anything wrong at all with saying to the government or representers of the government, look, these figures don't really add up. I'm hearing this. I would just like to have some more clarification. Please, could you, if this is dangerous, and I know you don't believe it is, but if, because lots of people are a bit concerned, why can't we raise this? Why can't we have a public debate? Why can't we bring it out into the open? Because in my mind, the only way to have a sensible approach to this is to have all the whack jobs presenting their evidence, if you like, and then the government presenting theirs, and having a public consultation about this, particularly if the health of the nation is at risk, because surely any, and I keep using this term because one would assume that they are, benign government, a friendly government with our interests at heart, who would want to do us no danger, and who are our servants because we are sovereign and we put them in the positions to make these decisions, and not the other way round. We don't live, I know it feels like it, in a dictatorship. In theory, I mean, we shouldn't do, according to the Magna Carta, nobody is above the law, that we the people, if we feel that we're being sidelined or we are not 100% believing what they say, surely in order to move forward, it's in the interest of the representatives of us to say, yeah, okay, yeah, you've got a point there. That's interesting. I think you're wrong, but you've got a point. There's a lot of people who believe this. Instead of just calling them whack jobs or nutters or this, that and the other, they may be confused. It may be disinformation. It may be, but there may be grains of truth in it. And that's where I think we have this system where the people and the government seem to be at loggerheads, and a public consultation, a way that all the information could be put on the table and say, look, is this really happening? Is this good for us? What about this? I've heard this. Is that true? At least give us a chance, all of us, to be able to have the freedom to discuss these things without being closed down. And I think that's really what a lot of people would want. I don't think that that is too much to ask. But then maybe I live in cloud cuckoo land.